Hello, good afternoon everybody. I hope you're ready for the last presentation of the day. It's my pleasure today to introduce Ulla Lehtinen from Wärtsilä. Ulla has a master in electrical engineering and is working within Wärtsilä as a manager of the business development team. And he will talk today a little bit about the Crossroads to net zero, which is a different path to achieve net zero. So welcome, Ulla.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ulla Lehtinen. Pleasure to be here. There are still some people left. I know it's last presentation between, so I'm the last person between you and the beer bus, so I try to be fast and concise with my presentation. But yeah, so I work in a business development team in Wärtsilä as a manager. And this team is also known as the power system modeling team or PLEXOS team of Wärtsilä. And the topic of my presentation today is our recent report called Crossroads to net zero. So at Wärtsilä, we do or use PLEXOS for multiple purposes, multiple type of studies, and one quite common use case is country level studies, capacity expansion models, classical capacity expansion models. And I believe this study falls into this category, but it's global model, so it's a bit unusual. And I would say that it's quite high level, so it's maybe leaning more towards marketing type of material, but yeah. But before I jump into the study, just very briefly about Wärtsilä. So Wärtsilä is a Finnish company, marine and energy company. And in energy sector, we sell engine power plants and battery energy storage systems. And currently, we have around 80 gigawatts of power plants, engine power plants installed around the globe. And something like 22 gigawatt hours of batteries installed or under construction or contracted. So this battery energy storage sector is growing very rapidly. Then I wanted to include this slide because in these PLEXOS modeling conferences, I often hear people talking about gas turbines and CCGTs and so on. So I wanted to educate a little bit that there is a third technology and what it is. So this is our product, engine power plant. So engines consists of these generating sets. So these are not gas turbines. These are actually piston engines. Each generating set is typically 10 megawatts, or the larger ones are closer to 20 megawatts. But you use these modular gensets to build power plants. And I think our biggest power plant is 600 megawatts. So these are proper sized kind of large scale power plants. And when I showed this slide to my boss before coming here, he said that, yeah, it's okay to show this, but could you add something to give people the impression of scale? So if you look into the lower corner, you can see that there's a personal or maintenance person. So you can see that these are not those small diesel backup engines. These are actually very large engines. These are originally from marine, but then were introduced on the power sector because of they are very flexible. 2-minute start. So you can start the power plant in 2 minutes from 0 to 100% load. And there's no start cost. So that is the reason why these are getting increasingly popular in for example, in ERCOT, in wind, in nodes where you have a lot of wind and you want to do wind chasing and fast reaction to very volatile net load. But yeah, then about the study. So in this study, we wanted to model this path to net zero across all sectors. So this was the assumption taken from, or the kind of core assumption of the model. But then we wanted to play with the thought that could you achieve net zero by using just renewables? And by renewables, I mean just solar, wind, and battery energy storage. So this was the kind of question that we wanted to ask. So to answer that, we modeled two pathways. So the first pathway is called renewables and storage. And in this scenario, we allow PLEXOS to only expand the system with solar, wind, and energy storage. While in pathway 2, there's solar, wind, energy storage, but also balancing power plants. And these are gas power plants, which will first run on gas, but will be then converted later to run on sustainable fuels such as hydrogen. And very briefly about the methodology. So I mentioned this is a global model. So we started by collecting or estimating the total capacity mix in the world, total demand, collected techno-economic inputs such as solar costs, learning curves from data providers such as BNEF, IEA, IRENA, and so on. So we took third-party data, took the current system, and used that data to run LT capacity expansion using yearly steps, hourly resolution, and running the model up to 2050. And this tries to characterize some of the dynamics or characteristics of those two scenarios, so what's happening in the model. So in pathway 1, in the renewables only scenario, and pathway 2 balanced scenario, we both start from, of course, with the current system, and the first milestone is in 2030. And we say that in 2030, there should be 11 terawatts of renewables, which is the COP28 tripling target. So this is programmed in the model, so the renewable expansion follows this schedule or pace until 2030. But the difference between pathway 1 and pathway 2 is essentially that in pathway 1, you keep using the existing inflexible plants alongside renewables. So you burn more coal and oil-based, or you use more coal and oil for power generation, while in balanced pathway, you build new flexible power plants running on gas to support renewables. And then in 2040, around 2040, we assume that in pathway 1, all the existing thermal is completely phased out from the system. And then at that stage, this pathway 1 is already 100% renewable, but it still has to grow until 2050 because we assume certain load growth that is required to meet the electrification and meet the external hydrogen demand in other sectors outside power sector. In balanced pathway, in 2040, it's not 100% renewable, it's 80% of generation is provided by solar and wind. And then only between 2040 and 2050, you make the final push to 100% renewable system. So you switch from gas to carbon neutral fuels. And then in 2050, you have a completely carbon-free system, which is, we only model power sector, but this model implicitly covers all other sectors because we assume quite high load growth, and also the model needs to produce certain amount of hydrogen for other sectors to decarbonize those as well. And then some fixed assumptions. So in both scenarios, the electricity and hydrogen demand are the same, cost assumptions are the same, fuel cost, carbon cost assumptions, and so on. those are kept fixed and are exactly the same in both scenarios. So, yeah. So then if you look at the results, how does this look like? So if we first compare the capacity mix of both pathways, in the first graph you can see the installed capacity in renewables and storage scenario, and in the second graph you can see it in the balanced scenario. And you can immediately see that there's a significantly higher build-out of renewables in the first scenario. And in the second scenario, there's this 4 terawatt-hours of balancing power plants in the final year in 2050. And this is the technology that makes the difference and makes actually the required amount of renewables so different. But both scenarios are 100% renewable. Despite the fact that in the first scenario you have approximately 120 terawatts of capacity, while in the balanced scenario you have only half of it, so approximately 60 terawatts. This is then the energy mix. So the solid line is the gross demand. You can see that there's a significant increase in the electricity demand. So currently the total global electricity demand is around 30,000 terawatt hours, but according to BNEF, their net zero scenario, which is based on sectoral, very detailed modeling, says that in 2050, the gross demand, including the hydrogen production using the electricity power sector, would be around 80,000 terawatt hours. But you can see in the balanced pathway, this solid gross demand is a little bit higher because in that scenario, you also need to produce some hydrogen for the power sector itself. So that is the difference. And then, of course, there is this those balancing power plants, which is this orange area, quite narrow slice. But those are the balancing power plants that they play a key role in the system. So they enable you to survive those, let's say, 3 to 5 to up to 1 week low renewable periods, Dunkelflautes. But the running hours or the total share of that generation is actually very small if you look at the whole system. So for example, in 2035, the share of gas in the total generation mix is only 10%. And in the final mix, which consists of renewables and battery and balancers fueled by hydrogen, the share of hydrogen fueled generation is only 3%. So this is the that was the installed capacity mix and generation mix, and then here I've collected a few key numbers. So if we compare those two pathways, we can see 65 trillion savings, 21% emission reductions, 88% less curtailments, and 50% less renewable capacity needed in the balanced pathway. And the first one, the 65 trillion reduced cost, this is the biggest savings I've seen in any PLEXOS scenarios. It's a massive number. So this is simply explained by the fact that in the balanced scenario, you don't need to oversize your renewable and lithium-ion battery fleet based on those Dunkelflaute periods. Because if you want to size your system so that you can run through low renewable output periods just by using a ridiculous amount of renewables and ridiculous amount of batteries, the cost is of course massive. So it's basically that is the key difference. And in the emissions, you might guess or might say that maybe the renewables only scenario is more expensive, but it must have more or less emissions. But that is also not true, because in the balanced pathway, if you now invest in flexible gas, you can actually replace more polluting technologies in merit order. So you are run instead of coal plants, inefficient peakers, oil peakers, gas peakers, and so on. So you immediately get emission reductions simply by switching from inflexible coal to flexible gas. Then about the curtailments. So these two graphs show the curtailments and the useful renewables in both scenarios. So in pathway 1, actually in the final year in 2050, I think it was more than half of the renewables would be wasted, because you have oversized the system in order to survive those few days of low renewable output. While in the balanced pathway, it's of course much more balanced. So you have some curtailments. Renewables are so cheap that you probably oversize a little bit, but it's much more moderate. And then finally, of course, if you have more renewables, you need more land. So we took the total amount of solar and wind, multiplied with some estimates that what is the land footprint of solar and wind, and landed on these numbers. So in pathway 1, you need more than 10 million square kilometers, which is equal to size of Europe. So this is of course obvious, because there's much more renewables in pathway 1. Okay, so to summarize the Wärtsilä's recipe for reaching the net zero is quite simple. So you start by adding a lot of renewables. This has to be done, otherwise you won't be able to decarbonize. But you need to add, alongside renewables, you need to add energy storage and flexible firm capacity. And this firm capacity will also replace inflexible plants and allow higher renewable utilization. And at some point, you completely phase out your existing inflexible plants. And then, actually, quite at a later stage, you switch from gas to sustainable fuels. If you think of in the early stages of the power, or in the transition, if you want to use your money wisely, you won't invest it in hydrogen, for example. It's much more cost effective to first build this renewables, a lot of renewables which will directly fed into the system and meet the load and meet the demand. And only at the later stage, when you have a lot of excess renewables, only then you start using the renewables for producing sustainable fuels. So we believe that you should based on your decisions on holistic power system modeling. So that is one thing. And then you need to enable, in order to achieve any of these targets, you actually need to enable this renewable growth. So you need to take action around the permitting of renewables, and then also sometimes solve the missing money issue of renewables because of the high price erosion, cannibalization. So you might need instruments such as CFDs to enable the renewable projects. And then we believe that in order to incentivize flexibility, you might need to tweak your market design a little bit. So this is means things such as increasing the market time unit, making it more granular. Don't use hourly markets, use 15 minutes markets like we are doing in Europe right now with the day-ahead market. That's the right direction. I think it's pretty easy to show mathematically that this is the most efficient way to do it. But I was in a workshop 2 weeks ago, a IEA workshop where we discussed the future market design. And I guess that there was a wide consensus that we should not break the short-term markets. We should not try to somehow change the day-ahead market, intraday market. Everyone agreed that they work pretty well, so they allocate resources optimally in the daily dispatch. But what is missing and where these short-term markets fail is the long-term investment signals. And therefore, you might need some additional incentives like capacity markets in order to enable this both renewable and thermal capacity and battery investments to solve basically the missing money problem and make the projects bankable. And then finally, when it comes to gas power plants, you should choose future-proof technologies. So choose flexible gas plants, choose gas plants which will be able to convert to sustainable fuels in the future. And then this is my last slide. So I just want to advertise. So you can download this study, this Crossroads Net Zero study through the link. We also do a lot of country-level modeling, which is probably in most cases a bit more realistic than this global study. So we've done studies, for example, for California, Chile, Finland, Poland, some studies in Africa and Asia as well. So feel free to go to our website and have a look at these white papers that we have made publicly available. Thank you. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Ulla?
The monitor says that I have 3 minutes left, so.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the nice presentation. In terms of the hydrogen burning units, are they CCGTs or OCGTs, like mostly peakers or?
So good question. So here we use the kind of technology agnostic term balancer power plant. In PLEXOS model, there was actually a mix of OCGTs, CCGTs, and in-sim power plants, but we didn't want to actually comment about that because we believe that in order to actually figure out what is exactly the right technology in each case, you would need a more detailed model. In this model, we have to simplify things. We had to use linear unit commitment. We wouldn't be able to capture all the cycling constraints and so on. So we didn't fully believe the results gave by PLEXOS because we know that they were based on quite high-level crude approximations. But normally you would then first maybe run the LT model, but then run ST model with more detailed settings and study in more detail that what are the right technologies. But yeah, so we assume that all those 3 technologies, OCGTs, CCGTs, engines, would be able to convert to hydrogen in the future.
That's very good insight.
Yeah.
Just one thing on that, in terms of the capex. At the end of the day, I think you need to consider capex for the generator that's going to be built, and if it is in and about the range of a CCGT and a peaker, that's really talking to everything, like the amount of renewables that you need. So I think if you go for peakers only, you need more renewables in your system but on the other hand, you are spending less money on building new peakers. If you go for CCGTs, then the build-out of renewables is lower, but of course you need to invest more on your CCGTs.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's down to the load factor of the units.
Yeah, that is the biggest single factor that affects the choice, because it's basically determines the annual running hours determine that how big or what is the trade-off between OPEX and CAPEX. And if there's a little running hours, then those technologies with the lowest CAPEX, of course, are chosen first.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think we are pretty short in time, so last round of applause to Ulla.
Thank you.